I primarily provide courses in the area of clinical and regulatory. And today we're very fortunate to have Michael with us, who is Regulatory Documentation and Submissions Associate with Gilead Sciences. And just before I turn it over to Michael to give some brief introductions, just a couple of points. I've had the great pleasure of working with Michael on his Team Masters project. This was a few years ago, and was in fact the first Team Masters project that I worked on with students. And Michael was just terrific. And we have something else in common, and that is that our first jobs in industry were with Gilead Sciences. And for me, this was many years ago. When I joined Gilead Sciences, we only had about 350 employees down in Foster City here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And now, Michael, there's several thousands across the world, but you can give us more details about that. So without any further introduction, I'll let Michael give us some brief background, and then we'll go into some questions and answers. And then later on, we can have some questions from the group. So Michael, maybe just a brief introduction of yourself and a little bit of background information.
Yeah, thanks, Larry, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Jones. I graduated from KGI in 2019, and I've been with Gilead Sciences for about 3 years now. I started off actually in a regulatory affairs rotational program at Gilead, and it's a 2-year program where every 6 months I would rotate into different groups within regulatory. So I would get a wide range of exposure on the different groups and how, the many different facets of regulatory affairs works, and just really just network and build my network up at the same time, and just figure out exactly what specifically in regulatory I wanted to do. And, after going through several rotations, I landed in the disclosure and transparency group, which is now called, 3D. It's no longer regulatory documentations and submissions, but we are now document development and disclosure. And in that group, I'm responsible for making sure that all the clinical trial data that we actually release to the public protects not only the patient, but also the company.
Great. Thank you, Michael, for that introduction. So let's start off with a few questions, and we'll kind of take it from there. And I guess the initial questions are, what are the favorite aspects of your current job that you really enjoy? And then correspondingly, what have been some of the, kind of the challenging job issues? And some of that might just be coming into industry as a new person. Others might be, specifically related to your job requirements. So your favorite aspects and some of the challenging issues that you've faced.
Yeah, so some of my favorite aspects of what I do now is I have the flexibility to work on many different projects that not only are involved with regulatory, but also outside of regulatory. So for example, I actually manage our Gilead clinical trials website. And so that has given me flexibility to work with our digital marketing operations group, our corporate communications group, even, clinical operations, as well as legal IP for what we will be putting out, later on in further, advancements of the website. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and really just I like the collaborative environment. So I guess one of the challenges, when I first came in is that, being comfortable with, asking questions, and, even since I was new to the industry and not really aware of everything within regulatory, but they created a comfortable environment where I was more comfortable in asking questions and learning more. Because what I learned is, Gilead, they really wanted to see you thrive while you're here. And Yeah, it's just been a pleasure to work with so many different individuals, different management styles and, different projects.
Yeah, what's it like to work on some of those? I'm sure you're involved in cross-functional team work quite a bit. Maybe tell me a bit about that, because I know it's an extremely important part about working in industry.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about KGI is that you'll always have a team project to work on. So
Mhm.
definitely the pre-work for KGI set me up, very well for what I do now. And working in these different team environments, everybody has a different role to play. But since it's a very collaborative environment, you have the opportunity to learn not only necessarily what your role and responsibility is through regulatory, but also what everyone else's responsibilities are.
Yeah,
And if you're more interested in, kind of learning about them, it's totally fine to, ask them questions and, because they might have an inefficiency in something that you may ask, and may come up and actually create a more efficient process. So, yeah, working in a team environment is definitely something that you will need throughout industry,
yeah.
no matter where you go.
I remember one of the things that was for me when I first came into industry that might seem like a small point was the acronyms that would be thrown around in meetings. Is that something that was a challenge for you?
Yeah, there was like still learning. Acronyms are still being thrown out there, and they're always coming up with new ones. So
Yeah.
it's like learning a different language on the spot all the time. So
Yep. I would come back from meetings saying, now, what was that? What were they talking about? That's right. Yeah. Um, what do you like about working? You kind of covered it a little bit, but what do you like most about working with Gilead Sciences? I know Gilead is very focused on addressing unmet medical needs across a broad spectrum of diseases. They started off really in the HIV realm, but have progressed well beyond that. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what you like most about working with Gilead Sciences, a little bit about the culture, some of the things that you found that have been unique or interesting that you didn't expect.
yeah, so even when we were doing our team masters project for Gilead and Laverne, I actually picked up on kind of the culture of the company and saw how everyone treated each other, and really just it's okay to just be honest. I mean,
Mhm.
in the workforce, and just um, when I came here, it was the same thing. It was just more amplified because there was more people on this site.
Yeah, yeah,
And everybody is very welcoming, and I thought a company's culture, regardless of the work that they do, is very important because it's um, where you can see yourself for the long term. And so in my opinion, if you enjoy the work environment that you're in, you're bound to do great work while you're there.
yeah. Um, what about some of the amenities working at Gilead Sciences versus when you were working on the TMP project?
Yeah, this one is definitely a bigger campus. And Gilead has now a well-being center, which is a nice state-of-the-art gym, and where they actually have a park right across the street from the gym, which will be open tomorrow for people to just walk around and have meetings. It's an amphitheater, so
Mhm.
any all hands meetings or state of Gilead's in general, you're more than welcome to just sit outside and have outside meetings and not necessarily be stuck in an office all day.
Right, right, yeah. Um, let's take a few steps back, and if you can remember back this far, Michael, uh, why did you come to KGI? What were the opportunities afforded to you at KGI? Tell us a little bit about how KGI might have prepared you for, your current work environment or not. Give us a good perspective there.
Yeah. So what I really liked about KGI and why I came there was I had a science background and I was used to actually working in the lab, behind the bench.
Yeah.
And I wanted to really understand, the different moving pieces of, well, if I were, by some miracle were to discover something curable, a cure to a disease in the lab, how in the world would I bring that, from an academic setting into the business side or, industry wide? How does that process work? And, after applying to the different programs and I saw KGI had reached out to me, asking if I was interested in a master's in bioscience. And I thought to myself, that's interesting. What is bioscience? And then I, read about the program and, they have, they merged the concepts of both business and science together, which is something that's really not taught. And that's what makes KGI so unique is they have this opportunity. And while I was at KGI, I recognized that they have all the different fields, biotechnology, management, regulatory, and even pharmaceutical discovery and development, which was my concentration because, I wanted to keep an open mind of all the different areas within industry and all the different ways that you can combine the elements of both business and science together. I wanted to really keep that open. And then, it wasn't until I guess my second year at KGI I realized that, no matter if you go down the business route or the science route, whether it's through med devices or through pharmaceuticals, you're always going to deal with regulatory. And regulatory kind of served as that bridge between both of those concepts. And, the best way to really, in my opinion, to learn regulatory was to just do it hands-on. And, KGI, had regulatory classes and the regulatory concentration, of course, which did serve as a good introduction into the field. But I just like to do things hands-on. And, the concept of, working in all these different teams on all these different courses that we did take, really helped serve me very well in, working in the corporate environment to where I am now.
Yeah, and maybe a little bit about, the networking opportunities that might have been afforded you that allowed you to kind of progress in your career. You mentioned that your team master's project was actually with Gilead Sciences, where you had an opportunity to meet some of the folks at Gilead. Tell us a little bit about networking opportunities that might have resulted during your training.
Yeah, so, just really networking, seeing what aspects of our project, just really fully understanding the scope of what our project was for my team master's project, and figuring out, who are all the different individuals that can contribute to the project that are at Gilead. We were actually fortunate in working with during our TMP, and, those relationships just, stuck. And we actually, a couple of weeks ago, or actually a couple months ago, we had a data science symposium at Gilead in the Foster City campus. And I actually was able to see my TMP liaison, Tom Upton, at the symposium. So, and it's like we haven't seen each other since, 3 years, but it felt like yesterday since we saw each other.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely the power of networking and building those good relationships with whoever you're working with, or if you're working for someone, can actually bring you a long way.
Maybe just get a little bit more focused on your current career path. Is it sort of following the plan that you had in mind initially? So let's talk about that. But also, I think, also tell us about what you actually really do on a day-to-day basis. You've kind of given us the broad scope, and I'm sure the students here would, what does he do really in the regulatory?
Yeah, so I guess on a day-to-day basis, it always starts with, checking your email, saying what either type of requests we come in from different departments within regulatory, based on, we have different requests coming in from different health authorities. So, we sometimes have FDAs or the EMA or even Health Canada or Swiss Medic requests on certain documents that we have for our products. So I work on, all of our therapeutic areas: virology, inflammation, and oncology. And we have to satisfy different health authority requirements when it comes to actually publishing clinical data behind our patients using these products. And, my group is responsible for, protecting the patient. So what we do is we redact certain data that could be identifiable to a patient, such as a subject number, a telephone number, or even, a personal address. And we also look at we work with our legal IP, clinical PK, as well as our biostatisticians groups, to identify any company confidential information. And this is information that we do not wish to disclose to the public because we want to maintain, for legal reasons, obviously, we want to maintain our IP. And so, yeah, that's my main day-to-day job on what I do, but I also manage and lead our Gilead clinicaltrials.com website. And so we're concentrating on, right now we're kind of in a maintenance phase on the website. We're determining what features and digital enhancements we want to have roll out for next year. And what we want to do with that website is really maintain our data sharing agreements that we have with, pharma, FPA, and other different regulatory bodies. And we also want to provide education and easy access to information about clinical trials, in particular our clinical trials, to healthcare professionals as well as our patients.
Mm-hmm. And do the materials that you prepare for your website, do those go through some sort of review process for compliance with regulations and so on? And maybe you can tell us about that, Michael.
Yeah, so the documents that we put on there are, the protocol summaries, plain language summaries, or any CSRs that we have. CSRs are, clinical study reports. And those each go through a different process of regulation and review by, our different departments, legal, clinical development, as well as our SMEs on any of the actual products.
Right.
And we want to make sure that, all of the information is consistent throughout each different element that we post them on. And we really want to make sure that we are not necessarily taking out too much information, because we want to have total transparency with not only our patients, but also the health authorities. So we're working on different ways to actually redact less and actually anonymize more of the data. So that way we're being more transparent, with our patients, and we're disclosing more data.
Okay. Just a couple more questions and then we'll open it up to the group here, Michael. But, I guess one of the basic questions that probably the students would want to know about is what advice would you give to new students or potential applicants at KGI, given your experience, your career trajectory, et cetera? What advice would you give these folks that are just trying to find their way?
Yeah, I would say definitely network. Just ask questions, get comfortable asking questions. And I guess the main advice is, it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to admit that you don't know something. And, when you admit that and you are actually aligning yourself with people that may know the answer or could help you get the answer, you're also building your relationship with that person. And what I've found that, that is still relevant to this day, especially, something my manager even tells me now is, relationships always trump task. Because if you have a good relationship with the people that you work with, you can get anything done.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, well said. And just one last thing before we open it up to the students is I'm sort of curious about the hierarchical structure at Gilead Sciences and, your reporting structure. Who do you report into? Who do they report into? Give the students some insight to what that kind of looks like in the real world.
yeah, so I report to my manager, and he reports into, I guess, the head of our department,
Mhm.
of the head of disclosure and transparency. And then they report to the head of document development and disclosure, 3D department, and then they report up to senior leadership in the regulatory affairs department, so the senior vice president of regulatory affairs, who then reports to the executive vice president of reg affairs, and then they report to the CMO, and then the CMO reports to the CEO.
I don't know if we have enough time to continue this conversation, Michael, but this is very representative of a large, huge pharmaceutical company. And so this is one side of the spectrum. It brings up the question of working in a large company versus a small company. And if you given that any thought, the advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, so I mean, even where we are, it's a very collaborative environment. I mean, people all treat you the same regardless of what your title is. And we're about a company of about 15,000 employees now. But you could easily run into the senior vice president of regulatory affairs, or even the CEO, which I have done at least 3 times at all my years being here, and they're always welcoming and engaging to talk to. So yeah, it really just depends on the culture. If you really want to weigh the pros and cons of working for a big pharma company or a small pharma company, you have to understand, are these individuals willing to speak with you? Are they very engaging? Are they welcoming to talk to? Because it could go either way, regardless of the size of the company.
Yeah. Yes. I think different people might flourish well in a large company or flourish well in a small company. It's really individualized situation. I think from a student standpoint, it's something that you really need to think about. You think about the resources that come to bear in a large company, but you also think about in a small company where you may not necessarily be pigeonholed into a specific role, because there are always an infinite number of tasks that need to be done and a finite number of people in a small organization. And you get called in to kind of going beyond your comfort zone sometime. Have you felt any sort of feeling that you won't have any advancement opportunity, or you're not growing as a professional working in a large organization?
No. You have to really, like I said, network, understand, what I really like about where I am is, the flexibility that's offered. So I'm not necessarily pigeonholed into, one set of thing. It's always good to keep your options open and be willing to learn whatever that it is that you want, that really speaks to you within the industry, regardless of company size. It's definitely easier at a larger company because you can do it at your own pace. Whereas a smaller company, you can't really do that at your own pace. It's like you just have to be constantly doing stuff.
Yes, you don't have the support staff to help you, and you don't necessarily have somebody you can that can mentor you and help you with questions and grow that way. Yeah.
Right.
All right, why don't we open it up to the rest of the group? Jason, I don't know if we have anything in the chat or not at this point.
I don't see anything yet.
Okay.
We may see
All right, so let's open it up to students here, and let's see if you have any questions that Michael hasn't addressed. I have a few more that I can throw out, obviously, but what questions do all of you have?
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, please do. Make it the toughest question you can come up with.
I was just wondering, excuse me, like how did you decide in industry over like maybe a job in academia?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question that you asked. Well, in academia, you're always, in my experience, you'd be working on one project for, more than 6 months or even more than a year, just depending on what kind of data that you get on, what you're working on. And I'm so results oriented. I like to just have like one project and, do it and be done and then move on and then go to another one and then keep figuring out, oh, I have the flexibility to do this, this, and this. So yeah, like just having that actual, flexibility is what made me understand, it's better to go into industry than to, stay in academia.
I've got some further perspective on that. I'm a pharmacist by training, and my career path, started off in academic and clinical practice and so on before I went into the pharmaceutical industry. And your goal is that you always wanted to help patients, and I found that, gee, perhaps working in the pharmaceutical industry might allow me to help even more individuals, because even though the scope of the products, if you will, or the therapies is smaller than in an academic setting or a practice setting where there's thousands of products on a given formulary, for example, you have the potential to impact the lives of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of individuals by helping bring a new product to market that's going to have a significant impact on the care. And so after I went into the pharmaceutical industry, where I've been for about 25 years now, and also work in academia, I've never looked back.
Thank you both so much.
Yeah. Saw that Emmanuel had a question.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot, Michael. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so I want to know, Michael, in your current role, let's say you have one single idea that could dramatically change everything for better, maybe your units, right? If you have this idea, I want to know three things actually. One, how confident are you that the team, you're able to get the senior management or whoever, I don't know, but then how confident are you that you're able to get the organization to adopt this? That is one. Second, how long do you think it's going to take? And then third is maybe you can, maybe without being very specific, what are the key actions you're going to take to bring this to life?
Yeah, so, one of our company goals is really just looking for efficiencies throughout any process that we have. And so the level of comfortability that I have, bringing, any ideas or suggestions for what we currently do to, my manager or senior manager is, very high, because they're always looking for efficiencies. And, it really just depends on what the actual efficiency to the process is. So sometimes, the timeline can be, from 1 month into, sometimes it'd be 3 months, or, it could be 6 months. It really just depends on what you're trying to improve. And, it's a very collaborative environment. And, sometimes what efficiency you may have, it may not come in right away than what you expect, but at least, your voice is always heard. And if you always come up with, different ways to keep improving, or adding on to the improvement that you have suggested, the faster that it could get implemented into fruition. Does that help?
Yes, I got your response. Thanks a lot. Insightful.
What other questions do we have from the group here?
I have a question, but also because I don't like awkward silences. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm the alumni engagement officer here. So my question is student alumni kind of related. Okay, so Michael, no one grows up being like, I want to be in regulatory. So what is it that, you like, what is it that happened that you were like, okay, you know what, regulatory, I'm into this. This is going to be my career, whether it be a class, a project, like what is it that like flipped that switch for you?
Yeah, so when I took applied entrepreneurship at KGI, I was totally excited to, explore how the business side could work when you do have, a scientific idea or a scientific breakthrough. And really, it came down to understanding not only how you can get this to market, but how can you get this approved, to the best of your ability in the fastest way possible. And so that's what kind of clicked in my mind. Okay, you always have to know the regulatory strategy. You have to know the regulatory route of how you want to get whatever it is that you want out there. And so, I saw that Gilead had a regulatory rotational program and, didn't require that much of experience for the candidate to be, have a whole bunch of experience in regulatory. And so I thought this was like the perfect opportunity to really learn and understand and also appreciate, the regulatory affairs concentration and, the whole process behind getting your product out to market. And, after being in the field for, about 2 years, after completing the program, I decided to stay with it because I did like the environment and the people that I was working with. And so, yeah, here I am now.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Plus, I always get to say that, I make sure that our company is following the rules. So,
Yes. I will say one thing about awkward silences is that regulatory affairs takes primary responsibility for audits, internal audits from the agency and FDA and other regulatory bodies. And the one thing that you want to get used to is not necessarily responding to awkward silence and going beyond a simple question that was asked. So that's why Michael and I are quite fine with awkward silences.
All right, so we do have a question in the chat. Abdul was asking, what are the basic requirements for a regulatory role?
yeah, so just really being, detail oriented, paying attention to detail, being a team player for sure. Just being comfortable with asking questions and, being okay with admitting that you don't know something because even in regulatory, we don't have all the answers. There's always different ways to engage with different health authorities and, to address certain questions that they have. So really just, and having the attitude of, you just wanting to learn. I would say those are the real basic skills. I don't know if Larry has any more to add to that, but.
Yeah, one of the things, of course, attention to detail is, you might have mentioned it already. I mean, that just goes without saying, particularly in the role of regulatory or quality, that's super important. Communication skills and working effectively in cross-functional teams, which we've already talked about, and being a good communicator, as I mentioned.
Going off that, would you say there's like multiple paths like to take that you could do for like a role in regulatory affairs? Like, is it only people with science backgrounds, or like could you have like legal backgrounds or like stuff like that?
Yeah, you can have different backgrounds, like legal backgrounds is fine. I mean, I've seen people who've had marketing backgrounds go into it, even people with computer science degrees go into regulatory, for maintaining the software that regulatory uses to either track submissions, that we've given to different health authorities. So it's a role that, it's very fluid, very open. You don't have to be narrowed down into one specific field to get into it.
I would just add that I think there is a bit of an advantage for having a science background, because you're going to be engaging, healthcare professionals, clinical physicians, nurses, and healthcare professionals that are part of your organization, and really having an understanding of the science and being able to communicate and interact in that way is going to give you, I think, a lot more credibility across these teams than if you otherwise did not. It's just my personal view.
Mhm.
So I did see, was it Ami? Was your hand up? I
Yeah.
think you put it
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, I had a quick question related to like having a background in science. I saw that you have a background in like market research, and my question is, did that help? Like, do you apply your skills in regulatory that you had in the market research?
Yeah, so really just basic communication and being a team player. Those are the main skills, and then some things that I've seen, throughout my internship that I was able to use not only in my second year KGI also, but in my career. Yeah, bits and pieces of it I use. But regulatory is a different field from marketing altogether. So there's not too much of the transferable skills there, but the soft skills are very transferable. So, basic communication, teamwork, and then, understand, like, having conversations with people in marketing, it helps, but but for regulatory, not so much.
Yeah, it's really useful to have that background, particularly if you do work in the area of reviewing promotional materials, for example, is having a marketing perspective, is really valuable to bring on those kinds of discussions too.
Yeah.
Michael, do you have any sort of leadership or managerial aspect to your current job and responsibility? You're responsible for oversight of others?
I don't have any direct reports, but I've always worked with certain projects, yes, where I do take like a leadership role. And let's say, for example, our website, I actually lead a team of about 7 other people who have all higher titles than me. So it's really good just to get that project management experience of just working with individuals who have higher and more experience than I do, to actually lead them into what I want to do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, this is another skill, leadership and project management skills, because what Michael is describing is kind of a matrix environment. You have the primary person that you're responsible reporting to, but you really have responsibilities to a number of other people in the organization as well.
Yeah.
Seemed like there was another question that came up.
Yes, we have another one in the chat from Lily. So you said that you started out without much experience in regulatory affairs, but what would have been helpful for you to have learned or know before starting this career? What was difficult when you first started out?
yeah, so what had been more helpful for me to know, you know, before starting this career was, um, you know, I guess really learning all those acronyms. I mean, I got a brief snapshot into them when I was at KGI, but you know, it's like learning a whole different language, and you know, even that can be overwhelming sometimes. So that was kind of a challenge when I first started out, but you know, I was able to work through it, and really just, you know, being what I wished I knew before. Another thing was, you know, just being comfortable and asking questions, and being okay with not knowing something, or at least admitting that I don't know something. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And those acronyms can also be geographical as well. They might vary from company to company, but
Yeah.
I remember one of the first ones that I came across was in a meeting, and somebody said, we got to make sure the TLGs are put together in time. And I came out of that meeting wondering, what in the world? So tables, listings, and graphs, that's something that gets appended to a report. So that's just
Yeah. And we actually call them table listings and figures now. You know,
right, TLFs or yeah. TFLs or whatever.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, good example there.
So another question from Lily. From your experience, which groups, internally or externally, are challenging to work with? And what made it challenging, and what steps were taken to address it?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I know, right?
We don't have any management from Gilead on this conference call, so let us know the real.
No, it's just me. Yeah. So, come up with, let's see. Well, I wouldn't say like they're all completely challenging to work with. Sometimes it's an individual. But you know, how you do that is you got to understand where they're coming from, and you know, you have to really just develop a little bit of resilience and patience, you know, to really just understand where they're coming from and what their, I guess, end goal actually is. Like, what is their big picture perspective on things? And so that can be a little challenging when you start out. That's why I say, you know, it's important to actually have that good working relationship with people, you know, prior to any task that you have, because it's if you both know that you can work together very well, then it doesn't matter what the task is. So that's kind of the steps that I take to address any type of challenges, you know, when working with a team or an individual. But, you know, at the end of the day, we're all trying to get to the same destination. And, you know, it's really just how you how you bring people along to go the same, you know, route.
Okay, another question from Abdul. Regarding the project management skills you mentioned, is it necessary to take a certification course to demonstrate that?
It's not entirely necessary, but it does help. I think it's very beneficial, and you know, it's one more thing to add to your, you know, your resume or to your LinkedIn profile. So if you feel that you need it, if you feel that it's going to help you in the long run, then I would say definitely do it. It's not required, but it's definitely beneficial if you do it.
Yeah, having an appreciation for project management concepts is really helpful in working in cross-functional teams. I'll also, just as an aside, there are dedicated project managers that work within companies, particularly large companies, which is an interesting and kind of fascinating role, because these project managers work across therapeutic areas and so on to help bring a whole project to fruition. So it's kind of an interesting role as well.
Yeah, and even the course at KGI, organizational behavior, is definitely a good introduction into project management.
Other questions? So, going back to the earlier question about challenges, I'm just sort of curious about, maybe think about an individual project that you were responsible for, kind of the nitty gritty of, and, where you had some real challenge. Can you kind of share that experience with us if you've had one? I know everything is easy for you, Michael.
No. There was one project when I was actually in the virology group for the regulatory liaison role, of where I was responsible for submitting 1572 submissions to our publishing team for the FDA. And so 1572s are just, principal investigators who work on a study. It's basically, it shows, the health authority that this is the principal investigator, these are the sub-investigators, and these are the studies that we're actually working on, for this product, for this indication. And I was fortunate enough to actually work on that with remdesivir, which is our treatment for COVID-19. And there were just, since it was a very demanding product at the time, we had a lot of different requests come in. And so I was responsible for actually managing all the submissions for, remdesivir, as well as maintaining the rest of our HIV portfolio, 1572 submissions. And so, really, I had maybe about a couple of weeks of training on it. But, training is one thing, but actually doing it hands-on is another. And the person who had trained me had actually left the company. So not really having that much resources to do things. So really just asking, one of the ways that I actually overcame that challenge was really just asking questions, to other people who may have had experience doing this. And fortunately, there were other individuals that had experience doing this. So really just working with them until, I really got the hang of things, and then, was comfortable enough to just do it on my own. And then, towards, I guess, the end of 2020, I actually was able to pass that responsibility off to someone else and actually train them on how to do it.
Okay. In this day and age, computerized systems, analytics, artificial intelligence, other, electronic tools are extremely helpful, but potentially have a ways to go. And I suspect that Gilead Sciences has a regulatory information management system and other tools that help you. Can you talk about the impact of analytics and some of these computer tools on your day-to-day job and the importance of them?
Yeah, so these tools are always changing. So it's easy to actually do it. Well, I guess it's easier now to do them, those types of submissions with these technologies, but it's really just making sure that you're properly trained on the different software capabilities that it can do, because there are some groups that use the software just for one thing and one thing only, and then there's another group that will go, they use the software for different things, or they have more things, more steps that they use with the actual software than what you're used to. So it's really just understanding the big picture of how the software works, what it's used for. We haven't gotten into much of AI yet, but we want to make sure that we currently understand what we have now and what can actually be improved before we go further on. So, one step at a time is kind of our approach on how we do things.
Yeah. I think as the students are learning, the regulatory environment is a rapidly shifting and changing environment. There's new regulations coming out all the time. FDA will offer new guidance documents and so on. How do you, as a regulatory specialist, how do you keep up on the latest information? I presume that some of your job is maybe global in nature. How do you keep up with the world regulations, if you will?
Yeah, so we have a global regulatory intelligence portal. And so what that serves as is a way to just notify anyone within regulatory affairs or even outside of regulatory affairs of what type of regulations are coming into play, what health authorities are looking at certain topics. For example, clinical trial diversity, that's a huge topic in our industry now.
Mhm.
And, there's of course guidance, issued from different health authorities all over the world about it. And, this is our way of getting notified of, what these guidances are, who to look for. They also have the guidance is sourced. So if we actually wanted to go on the health authority's website, we can actually explore it. And, there's actually one benefit that I actually did get in, doing my rotations was I actually got to work in the group that is responsible for putting these notifications out. So it's all about really aligning yourself with different groups, making sure you know what all these different groups are, all the moving pieces are, and how you can connect them all together. So that way, you're not completely lost in the field of regulatory.
Yeah, right. Jason, I think I saw a couple more chats come through, perhaps.
Yes. Let's see. So Lily asked, are there any training that we can look to do? Wait, sorry. Any trainings? Is there any training that we can do or look into before applying to regulatory affairs? Is it necessary or would we be trained on the job?
So yeah, there's a bunch of different training materials that you can look at. There's a Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, or RAPS. They have a lot of different training material. Unfortunately, some of them are not free, but there are other, Sightline Connect actually has a bunch of different training materials, and those are free. That you can look at, and just really, it's not necessary, but it definitely helps. It helps qualify you when you're applying for positions, and you find a particular position at a company that you really want, and you're taking that experience and knowledge that you already have coming in from having these regulatory trainings into play. So it shows, it makes you a better candidate when it comes to applying for a position. And yes, you will always be trained at your company, or at least you should, because if they don't train you, then how do they expect you to work within their environment? So yes, you will definitely be trained.
And I remember, Michael, as part of your experience in the TMP at Gilead Sciences, that one of the initial things that you had to do was to go through their learning management system and train on their SOPs and all of that, right? Maybe you
Yeah, and even when I got hired full time, it was the same thing.
had to take them all again.
Yep. And so, our interns have came in now, and that's what they've been doing. So, I mean, you're not expected to remember all of the trainings, but it's how they get you into the company first. And then once you actually start working on, certain projects within your group, then that's when you'll recognize some of the trainings have come into play. Like, oh, you can, and you always have, a way to go back to them. So,
right. I mean, that's one of the key regulatory and quality concepts, is that you get trained on a process before you actually perform that process. That's the theoretical important concept that the FDA will be looking for when they come in and do an inspection of your facility.
Yep. It's a funny story, because actually when I went to my second rotation in the R&D quality and compliance group, I actually went through a Health Canada inspection, and this was within the same week that I just joined, and they actually pulled up my record, because I've been with Gilead 6 months prior to going into that group, and they had asked me, why is it that I just now completed my trainings for this group and I've been here for 6 months? And I was like, oh no, I rotated into this group. So I mean, yeah, it's definitely something they look at, I can tell you.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Looks like Manuel, you had another question.
Yes. long time, but I wanted to know, Michael,
Mhm.
experience in the industry so far, was there anything at all that maybe in the experience we had, maybe you feel that KGI, you are going through KGI didn't prepare you for, or maybe you didn't pay so much attention to when you are going through KGI? Maybe it's in the curriculum or it's somewhere within the program, but then you didn't pay attention to it, and then you wish you had paid attention to it. Has there been an experience like that where you wish you had better preparation during your KGI program?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, at KGI, I definitely felt prepared for most of the stuff that I did, or stuff that I do now. Yeah, since I, didn't really take the hands-on regulatory concentration, I think that, yeah, there's there are some things that I definitely missed out when I first joined, but um, I had more fun with it, learning it on the spot. So, but KGI just did an overall a great job of getting at least a snapshot of what everything looks like in the industry. And, even when I took Larry Grill's class, I think it was ALS 333, bits and pieces of that class still come into play in the work that I do. So yeah, it's KGI definitely, it sets a good foundation for you. So, and it also just depends on what you want to do. Make sure you take, any classes of interest to you, that where you can see yourself in your career actually doing. Yeah, just take advantage of having those classes.
We had a few more questions in the chat. So as someone with a master's degree, what role are you likely to start with in industry?
Generally, you'll start out as either an associate or a senior associate. It depends on which company you go to. But generally, yeah, you start off with an associate level if you've had no prior, industry experience.
Yeah, it's sort of an entry-level role into industry, and then kind of growing from there, right, Michael?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then another question, can you please share more about what rotations were like? Which teams did you rotate in? And what did you take away or learn from each team? And were you able to choose your rotations? Sorry, that was a lot in one.
No. It's fine. I get asked about it all the time, so it's fine. So yeah, it's a 2-year rotational program, and you go through 4 different rotations. Each rotation is 6 months. 2 of the rotations I did not choose because they were actually required to, of the program, and the last 2 I did get to choose. And the rotations that I actually went through were, at first it was, regulatory documentations and submissions, where I got to work within medical writing, document processing, quality review, and disclosure and transparency, which is where I am now. And then my second rotation, I went into the R&D quality and compliance group, which is where I learned about, audit execution plans, audit strategies, and internal inspections and internal audits. And then in the third rotation, I was in the regulatory affairs liaison role in our virology group within regulatory. And that's where, I did some of those 1572 submissions, as well as learned a lot, with how our company speaks with the FDA for different type of requests and submissions. And in the last group was the regulatory intelligence and policy group. And in that group, I actually was able to, learn about the global regulatory intelligence portal, issue out newsworthy events, going on in the regulatory space, whether it be a new guidance, an FDA meeting, or an update to a guidance. I would be able to actually write up a summary and issue it out to the rest of the company, as well as, kind of look at, how we actually put patients first within regulatory affairs. And so during that project, I was actually able to meet with, different groups within Gilead. Some of them, within regulatory as well as outside of regulatory. So public affairs, clinical operations, our patient engagement team, and actually use kind of the FDA's website and really gain an understanding of how to look for different policies and guidances on there regarding, patient disclosure, which is what I do now, and patient engagement. And all of that actually led up to a research paper that I actually wrote and got published internally. And, we're actually in the process of trying to get a wider audience for it internally. And then future steps would be to have it published externally so that the general public will be able to read it.
Great.
And let's see, maybe the last question, looking at the time here. Does Gilead offer any regulatory co-op opportunities?
Actually, yes, they are starting to now. It hasn't been in play yet, but they're working towards it where they want to actually have an opportunity for people, not only in regulatory, but like they get to explore different fields within, safety or quality, just to bring it all in under, one house. So you can also, jump around in regulatory, kind of like an internal rotation, where you can work in a different group for about, 2 to 6 months, and then go back. You still have your day-to-day responsibilities, but you have the opportunity to work on a cross training with different groups. So yeah, that's internally. I don't think they have anything externally just yet.
Before Jason gives us our closing comments, I just want to thank Michael once again for very informative Q&A here. And I think the students had some great questions as well. So I really, really enjoyed the session. And thank you once again, Michael, for your participation. And I'll turn it over to Jason to close us out here.
Okay, thank you to Michael and to Dr. Davis for being here today. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. And I put a link in the chat, which will lead you to a page for future speakers as well. So this is one of many speaker series sessions that we have this summer. So please join us at another session. And again, thank you to Michael for joining us today. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening.
Yeah, no problem. And, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to connect with all of you. So it doesn't have to stop here. We can keep going.
Thanks, Michael.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. Everybody take care. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.